Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Welcome to you all, especially welcome to our international guest and Kinnikunnya favorite, Holly Black, joining us from the US. Special welcome also to local and currently international author Krystal Sutherland, joining us from London. So we really are crossing vast oceans and time zones for our chat today. Kino is hosting this event from Sydney, Australia, on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands from which you're all joining us today, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So back in the olden golden days of international travel, we had the pleasure of hosting both of today's special guests, and we're most excited to have them back, through the internet, through the ether. However, we love it. Thank you. I've been a fan of Holly's from the first page of Tithe, which I read when it was first released, and realized today that that was nearly 20 years ago. The Fae world that Holly created then has become even more intricate and fleshed out with each book that she sets there, giving me a little thrill when I recognize characters in the Folk of the Air that I'd grown to love in the modern fairy tales. Here today to talk about the Folk of the Air series and its gorgeous new edition, I do have props, How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories, I welcome Holly Black. And in conversation with Holly is Krystal Sutherland. Krystal is the author of Chemical Hearts, named one of the best debuts of 2016 and recently adapted to a feature film. This was followed by the critically acclaimed semi-definitive list of worst nightmares. Her next book, House of Hollow, due for release in April next year, is already receiving a massive buzz. Welcome, Krystal. So the plan is to have these lovely folks chat for a bit, then we'll move into Q&A. So if you guys out there have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A box. Welcome. So up to you guys. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you so much for having us, and I'm so glad that we're all able to gather, even though we're in far distant corners of the earth right now. This feels almost like coming home and being amongst my bookish people and getting to chat to Holly Black. Oh my goodness! Welcome to Australia via London and the US. So of course we are here today to talk about the beautiful How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories. And when I say beautiful, I mean it is a piece of art. Look at this. Oh my goodness. So just to pick it up and to touch it and to feel it, I was reminded of illuminated manuscripts that have the kind of gold on the page. So tell us, where does this fit into the Folk of the Air trilogy, and what can people expect when they pick it up to read it?
So when I first sold the 3 books that are the Folk of the Air series, I sold it with a novella. And I had intended to write a card novella, but when I sat down to do it, I realized there was no way at that point in the story that I could, and I wound up writing The Lost Sisters, which is mostly about one of the other sisters, not Jude, Taryn, her twin. And that, so I wound up doing that, but I always had this idea in my head that I wanted to write this card novella. And when my editor approached me about doing something, some new project that was set in the Folk of the Air that was not like necessarily a full novel, because we were sort of talking about what we're going to do next novel wise separately, but something. I thought I'm going to do this card novella, and but it was interesting to think about, like, well, what would make it really special and different and fun? And I love illustrated books, and so I was super excited to maybe do this as an illustrated book. I went back and forth on the idea of, like, should it be a comic book? Should it be this? But I want it to be like a fairy tale. And Ravina Kai, who's the illustrator, is just incredible. I think her work is so emotional. And so it was a dream project to get to do. I love a weird project. It's just a weird, fun project. Everything about it is just for fun.
Absolutely. Well, I guess that leads me into my next question then, is how did you come across Ravina's work, and how did you know that she was the illustrator you wanted to work with on this project? How did you find her? She's Australian, I believe. She's from Melbourne. Yeah.
Well, we were just looking at, looking for different artists. She's a World Fantasy Award winner. You've seen her work on various different things, and it's all so emotional. And, we just started looking through, like, I think her landscapes, even, they feel like characters. And her characters are very beautiful, but I think that combination is really difficult to find. And I think Fairy is as much about landscape as it is about the characters. So I think she just seemed like she would be perfect, and we really hoped she would do it, and she agreed. So very
That's
thankful.
amazing. So you knew exactly who you wanted, and then you were able to work with this person. What is that process like? Is it a very collaborative thing while you are writing the stories? Is it more like you write pages and then you send them to her and she sends drawings back? How do you kind of come up with the illustrations that eventually make it into the book?
So I have, I've worked on a bunch of different illustrated projects. I worked on Spider-Rick with Tony Deodolizzi for many years, and that was very collaborative, where we were doing exactly what you were saying. We would sit down together, we would kind of figure out what we're going to do. I would be writing stuff, he'd be drawing stuff, we'd be sending stuff back and forth. In this case, because this was through our through the publisher, we did not get to really talk. We talked through people, which is the more traditional method. They kept me out of her hair. And so, I had finished the book. I'm not sure it was finished, but it was mostly done. Like, I was still kind of tweaking it and editing it, but it was a complete manuscript. And so she was sending me sketches, and I, could send back some notes. But it was all through the machinations of the art department. I sent a lot of notes. Like, more jewelry, please.
I noticed in your acknowledgements that you said to Ravina, you apologized for asking for more Carden extravagance all the time.
Like, what about a point to your boot?
Go more, go bigger. So was this then the first time that you had seen, like, I guess this is like the canon illustration of Carden and of the rest of your characters. What was that like? I mean, this is the first time that they're like from your head onto the page illustrated. How do you feel seeing them for the first time?
I mean, I think it's an interesting way to think about it, because they're not from my head. They're very much from her head, you know what I mean? And I had things that I wanted to make sure got in there and notes to give, but I really do think that, they're her vision of them, you know what I mean? And I still have a vision of them that's in my head that's from writing the books, if you know what I mean. That's always going to be there. I am incapable of translating. But I think I had I was very aware of things that I felt like people would really want to see, and ways that they would want the characters portrayed. And, I wanted to make sure that stuff made it in there. A lot of notes about the tail. A lot of forget the tail. Never forget the tail.
Do you remember any particular notes about the tail at all, or
where is the tail?
Where is the tail? More tail.
More tail. That tail looks great.
Very important to get right, the tail. So I also wanted to know kind of how it was diving into Carden's perspective, because we spend so much time with Jude in the trilogy, and they're quite different characters. Was it like fun to play around in the, strange playground that is Carden's mind? Like, how do you dive into that, and how does it feel?
Well, I mean, and I'd be curious if you think this is true. Like, I had to know what was going on with him to write the book, right? I had a pretty clear sense of what was happening with him, but it is different to then actually nail down the extreme specificity of those feelings, where they came in. Because I had more of a nebulous sense of, like, in this part of the book, he feels like this, and in this part of the book, but like, moving through a story, you have to find those hinge points of, like, yeah, but when did it change? Yeah, but what happened in this scene specifically? And I think that was tricky. I I wanted to make it clear in this that he wasn't mean to Jude because he liked her. You know what I mean? That he was mean to her and he liked her, but that he was not mean to her because he didn't like her. His liking her was just the worst cap on a terrible Sunday of feelings. And so I really wanted to make sure I got that exactly right. And I think there were definitely times where I thought, no, this isn't right, and I'm not sure how to get it right. But that was also the fun part, because I am a person who changes a lot of what happens as I'm writing. Like, I will come up with a plot, and then I will burn the plot to the ground, and then I'll come up with a new plot from the ashes of the old plot. So actually having scenes where I knew what happened, where it was really fun, because then I could just figure out exactly what was going on in the character's head.
And that kind of leads me into my next question as well. And I'm sorry if this brings back painful memories for you, but I noticed in the acknowledgements as well that you thanked Kelly Link for reading 70,000 versions of this, and Lee Bardugo for reminding you what a plot is. Can you tell us about some of the challenges you faced while you were writing? Sounds like you had a bit of a struggle.
I mean, no more than usual. Together pretty easily given my usual process. Oh yeah, I just remember sitting at, so Kelly lives about 5 miles from my house, and we write together a lot. And so I remember sitting in her, she's like a big room. We were called outer space for some reason, but we were sitting in there, and I just kept basically changing the beginning over and over and over again, and being like, what about it this way? What about it this way? She's very patient. Very patient. Yeah, Lee read it and was like, I'm not really sure this is a plot, but I think it works. I'll take it.
Do you think there's a difference between writing a book and then writing a novella? Is there any kind of like procedural, structural difference that you have going into it? Or does it all kind of come out the same way?
Well, I think in this case, because it has a frame story that's set in the future, I think the frame story functions like a story. Like it functions entirely like a story. But I think the past stuff is not necessarily what I would think of as being in a book, in the sense that a lot of it is already in a different book. And so we're seeing it from Card's point of view, and we're reframing that. But that seems like a very strange thing to be in a book. I think you could do it. But I am not sure I have ever done anything like it in a full-length novel, because I feel like if I were doing it at full length, I feel like I would want to do something about it to make it, to make the beginning and end part different. I mean, as a kid, I remember reading Interview with the Vampire, which was a defining moment of my life. Bought it for 25 cents at a garage sale. Wasn't sure what I was going to think, little nervous. Loved it. And then reading, when it came out, this is how long ago this was, when it came out, reading The Vampire Lestat and being like, wait, this person was seen from a new angle, was a wholly different person. You know what I mean? And I think in a long form book, that would have to take on greater significance in the plot, in a way that in this short form, because we have the frame story that's set in the future, we don't have to engage as, like, there doesn't have to be a surprise in the story that changes the old story, where I would feel like if I were going to write this as a full-length novel, there would have to be a piece of business in the novel that changes how we read the Cruel Prince, not just how we see Carden. I think. That was such a good question that I have now really got down a rabbit hole with it. I apologize. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's so joyous to read to read a novella like this, where you know the characters so well, and you're getting this like special window into, it's like seeing on the other side of a mirror almost. And I think that's what makes this particular book so joyous, and why I enjoyed it so much, and why so many other people will enjoy it as well. Speaking of enjoying,
but would you do it? Would you write, if you were writing a full-length novel with one of your characters, take it out of the original book, what would you feel like there's a difference between writing a novella and writing a novel? This was such a good question that I really want to hear from somebody else.
I guess you're thinking about it in a different way to how I was thinking about it, in terms of, I was thinking like, how much do you structure a novella? Like, do they hit the same kind of plot points as a book? Because you need your first and second and third act in a book, and like, how much of that do you kind of transfer over to a novella, which is essentially a shorter version? And this is also kind of snapshots of a story that we know bits of already as well. And so I was just wondering how you kind of approached that from a structural angle. But then you have blown my mind and thought about it in a different way, like the frame stories. And so yeah, I have no idea what I would do, but you have made it look easy. So props to you. It works beautifully.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Lee. Once again, you've led me perfectly into my next question. When we're talking about fantasy and the enjoyment of fantasy, I think this has been quite a tough year for many people, and especially a tough year for many readers. I know lots of people have really struggled to pick up books, to get into books when so many other things are going on in the world. But a fairly consistent pattern that I've noticed is that the books that people are picking up are fantasy. And I've found this for myself as well. It's just this pure escapism that I've really been drawn to. And it's kind of like the only thing I can read at the moment is fantasy. So I wonder how you feel about that as a fantasy writer in 2020. Like, why do you think people are flocking to fantasy so heavily in this strange year?
I mean, I think there's probably a couple of reasons. Certainly the idea of stepping away from the world at the moment is a beautiful temptation. But I also know a lot of people who feel a great deal of anxiety when they're watching films right now where people aren't masked, even though they're, set long before the pandemic. And, and I wonder if the realism in books feels jarring. It feels like jarringly not realistic at the moment. In ways that create a dissonance, that in fantasy we already know the world is different, and so we don't necessarily expect it to abide by the same rules we're currently abiding by.
Yeah, I know what you mean about the movie things, because I feel stressed whenever I see people on screen hugging or shaking hands. Like, there's this visceral body reaction of like, no, that's not allowed. What are you doing? And then I remember, and I was like, this is from the before times. So that's a good point. It's like completely transporting you away from a world where this is happening, but also the reality that we read in realistic fiction is also some kind of fantasy at the moment. So
right, I think it creates sort of a weird dissonance, a weird envy. I watch people in restaurants like really angrily.
Scenes of people at concerts and stuff, just like, what strange reality is this? I don't know, an alternate universe. Okay, I want to talk about fairies for a little while, because when I think of Holly Black, I think of fairies. And it's probably because of the Spiderwick Chronicles and the Folk of the Air, and it's also because of your ears as well. Right. Do you feel like fairies are ingrained in your blood? Like, were you one of the kids who was always down the back of the garden looking for fairies when you were growing up? Or has this kind of been something that's developed over time?
I absolutely loved fairies when I was a kid. My mother was a painter, and she had this book called Fairies, which I don't know if you've seen. It's this big illustrated book from the 70s. And it was done by Brian Froud and Alan Lee. And Brian Froud, if you're not familiar with his work, did the concept art for Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. And Alan Lee did the concept art for Lord of the Rings. And so imagine them together in this tiny English village where they both live in the 70s, like painting these terrifying and beautiful fairies. And not a kid's book, but, you know, I remember looking through it and having it have this, this attraction, and also like there was something repulsive and something frightening about it. And that combination really, I think, formed a fascination in me, and later sent me out, you know, reading folklore, but certainly also sent me out into the yard around my house. And, you know, there was a little weird swampish area down a hill that we would, you know, go to as kids. And I remember looking for fairies in those spaces, and a huge amount of Spiderwick was really remembering what it felt like to be sort of looking in the backyard and to believe that I really found proof. You know, I would be like, this is, look, there's this weird, you know, top of an acorn that's arranged in this way.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean about the fascination, but also the terror. Like used to be obsessed when I was a kid with the fairy rings, when there was like a ring of mushrooms. And I can't remember exactly, like something, you step into it and something bad happens to you, or you get taken to fairyland. And I was just, I'm not sure if I fully believed it, but I was like, I'm not going to risk it. I'm not going to like step over this thing, because not worth it. None of that, thank you. Like, it just felt so scary and so possible. And I really like that about fairies as well, how they're, you know, these beautiful creatures, but they also have that terror behind them.
I think there's something about child decisions too. Like, I remember reading a book about werewolf folklore, and I don't know, and it had this, there was a white flower that if you smelled it, you would become a werewolf. And I remember like really going over the moral quandary of, if your family is with you and they're going to smell the flower, do you smell it first or do you run? Like, which way do you go? And I think that, like, when you think about a fairy ring, you think, do I or don't I, right? There feels like there's this, you know, it's put to you in a way that fantasy things are not often put to you.
Yeah. Would you step into the fairy ring, or are you a doer or a backing away?
No, don't step into the ring. Don't step into the ring.
Don't step into the ring. You've talked to people who have seen fairies. I mean, what is it like to have conversations with them? And like, are there themes and patterns that you notice across these conversations that you have with people?
I mean, yes. So when we used to go out and do, and we would tour for Spiderwick, Tony and I brought this red book, and it was to jot down anyone's experiences with fairies, and people would fill it out. I don't know what we expected when we started it, but I think we thought it would not be quite as many adults as did. And all the encounters are, one of the things I really love about folklore, and I think this speaks to that, is folklore is unlike mythology, right? Where we have these stories of gods and goddesses, and they are stories where we see the whole thing. Right? We understand, you know, here's the god who has created thunder, and here's why, and here's what was going on with them. But in folklore, it's often about like humans bumping up against the supernatural and then coming away from it, perhaps changed, perhaps unchanged. And a lot of the stories were like that. They were, one night I was sitting in my room and I looked out the window and I looked into the knot of a tree and there were lights there. And isn't that weird? You know, nothing happened. Right? Or, you know, I was on my bed and I looked down and there was a little man and he ran, you know, again, he ran into a hole in the wallboard and he was gone. Isn't that weird? Like they're stories without structure, right? They are a moment in time where something bumped up against our rational world.
Yeah, they leave you with more questions than than answers, and you come out of them more confused than when you went in, I suppose. That's what I love about folklore as well. I love like you said, the gods and goddesses, you know the whole story, but when you're bumping up against something, you're just getting a slight taste of it. And I think that's what is so beautiful about folklore. We are almost time for our Q&A, so I'm just going to ask you a couple of last questions that I'm curious about, and then we can go to some questions from the audience. But one thing I wanted to ask about was the fashion in this series, because you seem to take such delight in creating and describing these sumptuous gowns and doublets and all of these beautiful garments that people are dressed in. I'm wondering, where do you draw your inspiration from, and how much do you love writing about these pieces?
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I think that the texture of Fairy is really a big part of its pleasure, and a big part of what is going to make it feel authentically strange as well as compelling, right? I think that the garments can't be too pretty. They have to have something about them that is odd or alarming or dissonant. But I really love thinking about what they could all be wearing. Spend some time on Pinterest, spend some time looking through art books, and just seeing whatever seems to me to be compellingly strange.
I think my favorite outfit from the new one was the dress made of stingray. That was just so evocative and so, like you said, strange but beautiful. I really
had a hard time. The undersea, there's a lot of the same stuff where you're like, well, it's fish bones again. More
Stingray was a stroke of genius. Somehow like luxurious, like a snake skin or something, but perfect for the undersea. And then I will stop taking up your time and hand you over to the audience after one more question. We have spent, so much time in this world now, this lavish, beautifully constructed world with these characters that we love. Is there going to be any more happening in Elfhame that you can tell us about?
Well, not entirely, in the sense that I can't tell you what, but I definitely am working on figuring out something that I want to do in Elfhame. I think there's a lot of threads that are still open. I've been writing in Fairy for a long time, and I am excited to continue to do that. Also, more specifically in this world and with some of these characters. I would love to have an excuse to find out what's going on with Maddie. In the human world, it just seems like it will be really funny to see him have to try and put up with it. And yeah, I think there's still some open questions to be answered.
Well, that makes me very happy, and I'm sure it makes everyone listening very happy as well, that we can look forward to maybe some more stories in this world not too far away. So I'm going to open up now to the audience Q&A. We have a question here from Maddie, who says, how do you think Carden would react to the pandemic?
I mean, that is an interesting question, because fairies, have probably a much different sense of their, like, what brings them low, what diseases affect them. We never really see the same kind of illnesses we have in Fairy. Mm-hmm. It's not that they don't have problems or conditions or things, but they're often more like poison-based or more curse-based illnesses. So I think it would be very puzzling for them to see the world so changed, because I think they think of humans as being one way. And we are a very different way right now. We are reacting differently. We are, existing differently. We're not following the patterns that I think fairies are used to us following.
Yes. And we have another great question here from 61413, who says, hello, Holly. Welcome to Australia. On rereading The Cruel Prince, I found myself really intrigued by Jude and Taryn's mother and her time in Elfhame. So I'm wondering if you'll ever write her story. Thanks so much. Actually, it is from Laura, who put her name at the end.
Hi, Laura. Maybe. I have a better idea of what happened than we know, but it is really hard to figure out how to put that in organically. Because because we don't really have anyone alive to keep that record. And obviously I could go and just tell that story, but I think there's something of it being Jude and Taryn's story too, that it would be interesting to be able to get it in a way that they were able to hear it. But yeah, I've tried to think about how to get it more in than I did.
So we have another question here. This is from Heidi. Where did your journey as an author begin? How old were you when you wrote your first story, and what was it about?
Oh, I am not sure when I wrote my first story, but I do remember that I wrote a very bad novel in 8th grade. So I must have been, I don't know, 12, 13. And it was called Knights of the Silver Sun, by which I believe I meant moon. And it was full of the things that I really loved at that time, which were Lord of the Rings and Interview with the Vampire. So it was a bunch of people on a quest. I think also like some other fantasy stuff too. So it was a bunch of people on a quest to free a bunch of vampires from an evil dragon who was called Venthromax. And I have read this book to great hilarity at various different juvenilia. I was once voted, I believe, the second worst on a panel. Scott Westerfeld won with his story of a demon in space who solves crimes. But I believe that I was robbed. Mine was worse.
I think my first book could actually be up there with yours and Scott's. I had vampires on hoverboards. So that, I mean, it was genius because no one has done it before and no one has done it since, but maybe it's for a reason because it's terrible. I'll have to read it.
Have you ever read any of it at like a juvenilia thing?
No, but I would love to and also hate to.
It's so fun.
I tried to get every element of every fantasy book that I'd ever read into this thing. So there are wizards, there are vampires, there are fallen angels. Everyone rides hoverboards for some reason, like wizards, angels, demons, everyone hoverboards. That's how you get around. It's great.
I gave people really weird names. Like somebody is just randomly named Death. They're not Death.
That's just their name. They're cool and mysterious and dark, you know.
Yeah, like,
Let's see what else we have here. Okay, I have a question from Connie. Connie says, what drew you to the love-hate relationship between Jude and Carden? Did you always intend on their relationship as being that way, or was there another outcome you were originally considering?
That was yes, I knew that was going to happen. I knew that was a piece of the book that a piece of the original idea, and it was a kind of intimidating piece to the original idea because I think it's a tricky piece of calibration. I think it could easily become something I didn't want to say. I could easily say something I didn't want to say. And so I spent a lot of time in the beginning, first saying, am I really going to do this? And then saying, okay, how do I do this? Like, what does a, hate to love relationship look like? What kind of structural stuff has to happen? And what is the stuff that I feel needs to happen to make this the relationship I want it to be and to, come from the place I want it to come from. So yeah, it was definitely there originally.
I imagine it's a very fine line to walk. And I wonder if you had to kind of, work with your editor or your agent to kind of walk that line very finely, or if you found that you found the groove really quickly. Because I could imagine you could be like too love or too hate to the point where it just doesn't quite gel. What was that like, kind of finding that balance?
Yeah, Lee Bardugo, I read this really early on, and she throughout the whole series was constantly like keeping me from making Carden too nice. She was always like, he needs to be worse. You need to make him worse. And it was, I think it's an easy situation to pull your punches in. And I was really glad to, have my friends and, there to say, no, you can, you need to push this. You need to like make it, you need to go further with it. That was the direction I needed to go. Like my instinct was to pull back. And so I needed to continually like make things worse and make what he said, more terrible, and sort of figure out how to make that more painful.
You did a great job. And yet we still love him, even though he is very cruel sometimes. Let me see what else we've got here. Hi Holly, says Lyndall. My debut novel is out next year, and I'd love to hear if you have any advice for debut authors.
Well, congratulations. I know that this is a time, I'm sure, of great anxiety as well as excitement. I think we have a tendency to think of, especially our first books, as being our books. But I think one thing I want you to just remember is careers are long. And they're not just our first book or our second book or our third book. They're definitely not our first hardcover. They're definitely not our first week of sales. And I think that there's so much pressure in what we hear from other writers, from, to compare that stuff, to really focus on that first week, to focus on that first moment, and to just enjoy the experience and understand that this is only one book and you're going to have a long career. But also I think what really helped me and made a huge difference in my life was finding a bunch of other writers, like-minded individuals, and becoming a community. Like, I think there is a community of writers, but it's different to have your own community. I think they've been there for me when I had, things go wrong, when I had big questions, when I needed somebody to read my stuff. They're always the early readers of my books, this core group of friends. And I think forming that group, like becoming friends with other writers who are going through the same experience that you're going through, just makes a huge difference. Like, you will need that community and they'll need you over the years. I don't know if you have any different or better advice.
No, I think that's the number one advice that I would give as well. It can be quite a lonely and solitary career unless you surround yourself with these people who are kind of going through the same things that you are going through at the same time. So yeah, really just like surround yourself with writers, and then you'll never feel lonely. And I think that is, that you can really, that will help you a lot. All right, let's do a couple of more questions. So we have one from Rachel here. It says, hi Holly, I've noticed that you dropped a lot of hints and foreshadowing in The Cruel Prince. Did you have a clear idea of the plot from the start?
I did, and also I didn't. I knew more about this series than I think I've probably ever known about a series. For one thing, I knew it was 3 books, a thing that has rarely ever happened to me in the past. Unless I was co-writing with someone, I have often sort of discovered it only after writing the first book. So yeah, I knew a lot of what was going to happen. I think the area where I really didn't know is there were things that happened in the third book. Like, I knew the big stuff, but the way it happened was not what I had planned when I was going into that book. And it was a book I had to really replan once I started, thinking about, like, what is this series about? What is the big question at the end of it? And trying to think about, okay, well, at the end of all things, Jude needs to, she needs to know, she needs to decide how much she's like Maddie and what she's willing to do for power. So how do I actually, make that choice possible.
Well, that kind of leads me into my next question, which is from Cassandra. Cassandra says, hello, Holly. I'd just like to know, when you're working on a book, what helps you get through writing the first draft?
I really enjoy revision. I do not enjoy drafting. I don't like any part of it. It is like taking an idea that lives in your head and is beautiful and turning it into crap. And I like revision because revision is like cleaning the toilet. You're not going to make it worse. So, right. So what gets me through writing the first draft is trying to have some sense of what happens. You know, ever since my first book, I promised myself I would always have some ending when I began, even if it wasn't the ending that wound up being there, like having some ending, trying to plot it out. And then, you know, I've been trying to push myself to go to the end without revising. I've never quite made it, but trying to like write through that first draft. In the last couple of years, I've been trying fast drafting, where you set a timer for like 15, 20 minutes and you have to write continuously for that time. It is really, really useful because, especially if you're somebody who, you know, does have trouble getting those words on the page and, you know, has trouble turning off your, you know, inner editor. I had this moment when I was, so my friend, Cassandra Clare, actually, she lives by this pond, and the pond is invariably cold, but you can swim in it. And I don't mind swimming in a cold pond. And so I was swimming in the cold pond with Cassie, and my husband kept getting in the pond, getting cold, and getting out. And I looked at him and I thought, that's how I write. I get in, I get cold, and I get out. And what I need to do is sit in that pond until my body goes numb and it's fun to swim. and that is the thing that I feel like fast drafting gets you closer to.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I just finished NaNoWriMo, actually. I did my 50,000 words. Yeah, I haven't done it for probably 7 years ago was the last time that I attempted it and that I won it. And it's just, it gives you no opportunity to go back and edit yourself. You just have to wake up every morning and just get the words out. And that is your only task. And it's so freeing to not have to like write good stuff, to just write words. And then they usually end up being pretty okay afterwards. Okay, maybe we'll do one or two more and then we might have to wrap up. So Alicia says, hey Holly, what's it like writing a villain? Do you ever feel bad for them and what they're going through?
I mean, hopefully I do, right? Hopefully I think it's good when you feel bad for them or when you feel something for them, because I think having some ability to connect with them means that they are understandable. Like you can sort of imagine, you know, thus for the grace of God go I, right? And I think those are the best kinds of villains. I think there's a place for villain that we don't understand. But I think that there is a real appeal of someone that we do and that we almost can imagine being. I think of Maddie a lot that way. He is somebody who I find weirdly easy to imagine being, but also, you know, is made some terrible choices.
Yeah, I think that's the mark of a great villain, right? Is like the villain always thinks they are the hero of the story. They never think I'm the evil guy. I'm gonna make the evil choices. Except maybe for Cotton, like he seems pretty okay with being the bad guy. But usually the villain is someone who feels like they are the hero and they're a sympathetic character, and it's just another perspective that kind of casts them in that villainous light. Okay, I think we'll do one more and then we will probably have to wrap up. So I have a question here from Sarah who says, hi Holly, and I'm just going to read the first half. The second half is, will there be any more books set in the Folk of the Air world? We already have touched on that, but are you working on any other books in the moment? And what is next for you apart from this mysterious Folk of the Air project that you can't really tell us about?
Well, the reason I can't really talk about it is because I am doing this one thing before I'm doing it. So I'm writing an adult book. For the first time, I am somewhat the way through it. It's a different world, and it's I feel like I'm writing it in a fairy tale. I am writing it by day and unraveling it by night and deleting the words. But it's been the thing I've been doing during the whole pandemic, and I can't tell whether that's no, I'm pretty sure it has slowed it down and made it like a somewhat more complicated to think my way through. I think sometimes my biggest pandemic writing problem has been, I feel like part of my brain is always worried about stuff and is sort of churning away there and not focused on this thing. The good thing is, normally I worry a lot about whether people will like the book or whether whether it'll be any good. And right now that seems a pretty low level concern next to my other concerns. So that's
way over there.
But that's what I've.
When can we expect this book? Do we have a rough kind of date of when it might come out? Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't think 2021 because it's not done.
Okay. And is this fantasy? Is this?
It is fantasy.
Fantasy.
It is fantasy. It's contemporary fantasy, and it's a new magic system. And I think that's at least part of what has been a struggle for me, is trying to figure out, exactly how it works.
Has it been exciting to kind of explore a new magic system, or is it daunting starting with the fresh page?
It's both. I think it's both. The more it gets closer to the thing I imagined it to be, the more I like it. But I hate drafting. I hate it. I'm gonna really like editing this book. I'm really gonna enjoy it.
You're gonna enjoy cleaning that toilet. It's gonna be sparkling by the time you're through with it.
But right now, not so much.
On that note, sparkling clean toilets, I think that's probably a good place for us to end. Thank you so much, Holly, for coming all the way out here to Sydney to see me, and the Kinokuniya people for hosting us. Thank you so much. And to everyone who came tonight to watch and everyone who asked questions. It has been a really joyous event. So thank you all.
Thank you, Krystal. Thanks for facilitating such a great conversation. And thanks, Holly, for your time from America. And thank you for this.
Aww.
This is my original. And yeah, I think this absolutely just changed my life and the way I looked at fairies and fantasy. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. And hopefully we will all be able to meet in the flesh in the future.
Soon, hopefully, yeah.
Let's do it. We'll hold you to that.
And we're looking forward to new work from both of you really soon.
Yeah, really
Thank
soon.
You.
Yeah.
Yes.
April next year. I'm just going to throw that out there. April next year, House of Hollow comes out. My tiny plug at the end. There we go.
That's what it's about.
Very good.
No, wait, before you go, what's it
about? Okay, sorry. House of Hollow, it's an urban fantasy. It's about three sisters who went missing from a street in Scotland when they were children. They disappeared for a month, and then they came back with no memory of where they had been or what had happened to them. They all had a tiny scar on their neck. That was the only sign of anything strange that had happened. And then 10 years later, we flash forward, and one of the sisters goes missing again. And the other two sisters have to kind of figure out what happened to them as kids so they can find and save their eldest sister. House of Hollow, April 2021. Check it out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And we hope to see you all soon.
Bye.
Cheers.